Hi everyone. I am Gabriela Vic Pedro. I am PhD student working under Professor Otto de Valle for the postgraduate program in linguistics at Universidade Federal de São Carlos, and also a member of the Interinstitutional Computational Linguistics Nucleus. I will be moderating them today, so feel free to ask and join the discussion. This event is part of a Berlin Ao Vivo, Linguistics Online. These activities are broadcasted online on open and interactive platform with spaces for questions from the audience. The Berlin Ao Vivo series aims to provide students, researchers, and others interested in different aspects of linguistics research with free access to discussions and presentations of the most diverse topics related to the study of human language. Today's conference, Detection of Harmful Information, Fake News, and Hate Speech, will be presented by Professor Paulo Rosso, full professor at the University of Valencia, where he is also a member of the PRAL Research Center. And his research interests are focused on social media data analysis, and mainly on author profiling, sarcasm detection, fake news, and hate speech detection. Currently, he is the principal investigator of Spanish research project on disinformation and miscommunication, fake and hate, and member of the European Digital Media Observatory, Iberfire, on monitoring the threats of disinformation. He was co-organizer of the shared texts at PEN on fake news spreaders on Twitter. His work on detection of false information and hate speech was covered by Spanish media, and recently he gave a webinar at Spain AI on detection of harmful information, fake news, conspiracy theories, and hate speech. I would like to thank Professor Paulo Rosso for his participation in Berlin Ao Vivo. It's a privilege to have you here with us. Discussion of NLP in linguistics is very important, especially in an event like this. The floor is now yours, Professor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gabriela, for the nice introduction. So, yes, I guess you can see my slides, no problem. Right, so this is the plan. I would like to share with you in approximately 1 hour what we have been doing, not only us, but yes, mainly us together with my PhD students and colleagues with respect to fake news, and also a little bit at the end about with respect to hate speech. Okay, what's going on here? Okay, perfect. Yes, right. So. Yes, I will be focusing on harmful information. So, I mean, there is a little bit of a mess about information online. And so often the term information disorder is used. But, I mean, and information disorder mainly covers false information and information whose intent is to harm someone. So with respect to false information, okay, we'll briefly distinguish in a couple of minutes what's the main difference between misinformation and disinformation, but I will be focusing especially on disinformation because of its intent to harm. And also with respect to malinformation, I will briefly talk at the end about hate speech. Right. So I would like, apart from some, some definition and some, a brief introduction to the main concepts at the beginning. I will be mainly focusing on the way we try to approach the problem. Considering, for instance, emotional signals, because this information tries to trigger certain emotions in the readers, and also the way that we approach the problem from a multimodal perspective. So considering not only textual information, but also images. And later we'll say something about the importance of profiling possible fake news spreaders and conspiracy propagators, and our preliminary attempts with respect to that. At the end, I would like also to address the other side of the coin of the harmful information, so hate speech, and I'll be talking about what we have organized as a shared task at the SEMEVAL. A shared task we organized together with other colleagues in Italy about hate speech against the women and immigrants. I will briefly say something about the research and the shared task we organize with respect to the problem of the misogyny detection. And the last but not least, the importance to detect the stereotypes and, for instance, about immigrants or women, because it's the implicit way to convey an hate speech message via, stereotypes. Right, so misinformation, okay, this is false information, but not necessarily this is false information had the intent to harm someone, like, the famous case of in 1938 of Orson Welles. On the radio, he talked about the word of words that we were, invaded by aliens and so on. No matter that, some people believe that actually it was true, but let's say that the main difference is the really intent. So the intent wasn't really to harm the audience. Instead, in case of disinformation, and of course, this is not something new. This happened also in the past, and false information about the death of kings, like King George, was spread in order to destabilize the establishment. So this, of course, existed also before, but now, with internet, everything is faster. So the propagation is amazing. So many people are reached. So also in the case of misinformation, because of so many people are reached by this false information, still a good number could believe this information, and so it has to be taken seriously, especially in the case of disinformation, where the clear attempt is to harm someone. But, well, also in a well-known, in the case of a well-known web pages like The Onions, where satire is used. So, okay, the information about some politician, political events is clearly false. So most of people know about it, but even so, there were cases where people believed that this satirical news were actually, truthful. And it's different, as I said, when there is a clear attempt, like in 2017 for the French presidential election, there was a fake, a duplicate version of the Belgian newspaper Le Soir, where, some false information claiming the French president was funded by Saudi Arabia, had an offshore bank account in the Bahamas, and so on and so forth. So in this case, it's, it's very easy to see that the attempt was to harm someone concretely. I mean, the French candidate for the presidential election. And then nowadays, I mean, we are experiencing the pandemic, but I mean, the infodemics, sometimes people refer to this period because the quantity of rumors, conspiracy theories, and so on, that we have been exposed during the COVID-19 period increased a lot. And there were cases where people believe what was said by, former President Donald Trump, for instance, to drink hand sanitizer, that this would have contained the propagation of COVID-19 and so on and so forth. So when this information has to see with health is even more serious, because in this case, many people died, for instance, in Iran, because they took it, this false information into account. So, I mean, the damage is even more serious, of course. Right. Of course, many people have been working on false information and fake news detection and so on. But I mean, here in 1 hour, I don't have the time to cover also the work of other colleagues, like the very well-known colleague at Qatar, Preslav Nakov, who is a co-organizer of a lab, Check That Lab at CLE conference. And so I will be mainly focusing on what we have been doing. And of course, I mean, we cover more in details the colleagues' work in a tutorial we gave last year at CIKM. I think that the slides are still available if you are interested in downloading them. As it was said in the introduction, recently, together with some colleagues, we are part of the eVerifier, that is basically a project in order to monitoring, the information in Spain and Portugal, so in Spanish and Portuguese, in order to fight disinformation, right? So disinformation in Spain is considered really a problem. There is a study by the European Union that said that 88% of Spanish citizens consider disinformation a problem, and 66% of them came across to false information at least once a week. So it's serious. Okay, maybe this looks less serious, but I mean, just because also Brazil was mentioned, so I wanted to share with you. This news is in Spanish, but 3 years ago there was it was published on the newspapers that nearly 60% of Spanish admitted to believe at least once some false information as truthful. And so, I mean, actually, among the European countries, Spain seems to be the one with where more citizens, more people believe at least, as I said, once in false information. In the ranking, actually, in the worldwide ranking, the first position is from Brazil. So 67% of people from Brazil actually admitted to have believed at least once in a fake news. So, I mean, you have your your record. And okay, it's a kind of difficult and to ask to a display, because I'm talking on my own nearly. what among these three statements you believe that is false? Maybe one, maybe more than one. Of course, I could ask at least Gabriela for her opinion, but maybe also Miguel Oliveira, or I don't know if other people can talk. What do you think, Gabriela, or the rest? What could be the statement or the statements that contain false information? If you can interact.
1 minute.
So in the first case, a man was arrested for calling a directory assistance more than 2,600 times. And in the second case, it says that the money saved from leaving the European Union will result in the national health system getting 350 million pounds a week. And the third case, men tried to smuggle turtle onto plane by hiding it in an hamburger. So what are the statements or statement that you believe contain false information?
I think number 3, man tries to smuggle turtle onto plane by hiding it in a hamburger.
And okay, just this one or another one? No, just this one. Okay, so if nobody else can, can intervene. Yes, let's see if you're right. It's not easy, as you can imagine. So actually, it's the second one. In the first case, well, it's true. This is 30 years. The case of a 30 years old man that, some years ago was arrested in Japan. Yeah, to call this directory so many times. And the third case actually happened in China, and it was also true. I mean, that a man tried to smuggle turtle on plane. This guy says a KFC burger. You can see the picture now. Actually, this is a fake image. So this is another problem. So the news is true, but the image, of course, is fake. And it wasn't the case. And so the news about saving money, the fake news about saving money leaving European Union was the big fake news that was used before the Brexit referendum. And actually, it seems that had a very high impact on the people who weren't so sure about what to vote, if exiting, leaving a European Union or not. And what could be the difference with respect to the other two? Well, let's say that false, in this case, the false information of the second one could trigger probably. I mean, the reaction is not like in for the first one and the third one, that, okay, it's funny, it's strange, so it could be surprise indeed, but somehow it's funny. The second one, well, it's not really, I'm surprised, or I could be surprised, but it's not really funny. And putting myself in the shoes of, United Kingdom voter, probably I would get angry or something like this. So the emotions that this information, this false information could trigger is different. And actually, there was a study published 3 years ago in a very well-known science journal that where colleagues, Vazughi and colleagues, studied how, first of all, false information was propagated on Twitter much faster. I mean, false information travels faster, 6 times faster than truthful information. And moreover, with respect to the emotions that are triggered, false rumors, false information trigger emotion like fear, disgust, and surprise. instead, with respect to rumors that at the end can be, can be shown that are correspond to full information, that they usually trigger joy, sadness, anticipation. So, and actually, who knows if the example we have seen here, fear, maybe not a fear, but certainly surprise, disgust, anger. So at least 2 out of these 3 emotions could be triggered by a statement like this. Or, this is a tweet that circulated at the time of instead the previous American presidential election in the US. Did you vote for Hillary even though she's the criminal mastermind behind the child sex ring? So this was fake news that was circulating. And for sure, this is a case that could potentially trigger emotions like surprise, like disgust, and also fear. Oh, geez, is she able to do something like this? Pretty scary, right? Of course, this is not always the case, but from a statistical viewpoint, these colleagues showed that in most of the cases, these are the 3 emotions that are triggered in many of the fake news. Well, the way we tried to incorporate this information was on the basis, so I will go into a little bit into details. So as you know, nowadays, the state of the art is based on deep learning techniques. So basically neural networks with many layers. And we also use one of these approaches, long short-term memory architecture, but with the difference that not only we pass the textual information via word embeddings, but also we try to incorporate these emotional signals somehow that they are contained in the text. How did we do this? Or using an emotional lexicon, or considering not only the words of the lexicon, but also the intensity that the word could have in the lexicon. Some words certainly could be associated with a higher intensity. And in the third case, we use a pre-train once more deep learning model that, given a text, was able to infer the intensity level between low, average, and high for 5 reactions like love, joy, surprise, sadness, and anger. We carry out some experiments on a couple of data sets that were created from claims that could be downloaded from PolitiFact. So a portal where, some statements that later were shown to be false are tagged as fake news. So, we carry out these experiments on these 2 data sets, and we wanted to compare what we could obtain in the 3 variants of this EMOCRED architecture I mentioned before, based on LSTM deep learning architecture, or considering a lexicon, or considering also the intensity of the words of the lexicon, or relying on this pre-trained deep learning model, LSTM model, once more, that was able to infer the intensity of the emotional signal. And what we can see that no matter the 3 variants, with respect to just using the LSTM, so the deep learning techniques, that technique that makes use just of the textual information that it receives via word embedding representation, what we can see, the scores are higher, okay? And in one case, okay, with one of the three variants, so the variant that relies on this pre-trained deep learning model, in the other case with simply the variant that makes use of the lexicon. But the takeaway message is that it's important to integrate in the architecture emotional signals. This was done, so we did this also in another work with former PhD students, once more with LSTM-based, in LSTM-based architecture. We integrated emotional signals, but in this case, relying on not just one emotional lexicon, but on more than one. And the difference with respect to the previous work is that in this case, we carry out experiments not only on Twitter, but also on news articles. So two genres, Twitter data and news articles, longer articles. And moreover, in this case, the exercise wasn't to classify truthful information versus false information. But was, okay, truthful information versus no matter misinformation or disinformation. So could have been the case of satirical news, for instance, or propaganda, or clickbaits, or hoax. So, I mean, we wanted to cover different cases. And once more, we wanted to compare the results that we could obtain with this enriched deep learning architecture, where also emotional information was integrated, with simply using the LSTMs with textual information, or some classical machine learning approaches like super vector machine or logistic regression, and that receive the textual information with word-to-vec, like in the case of LSTM, or a simple bag of words. So one way or the other, what we could see both in news articles and on Twitter data, that it was possible to obtain better results when this emotional information was integrated into the deep learning architecture. Of course, results were higher in case of news articles, because articles were longer than simply tweets, but the trend, as you can see, is the same one. Right, in follow-up work this year published at EACL, the former PhD students wanted to show that actually, the way that emotions are triggered, through the document. Of course, we are not talking about Twitter, that is pretty short, is different. So at the beginning, the intent is to grab the reader attention with what? With words that could trigger, you see the light blue, surprise, or the green, the dark green, fear, or related emotions, in line with what was said in this famous work of 3 years ago, published in Science by Bozughi and colleagues. Right, briefly saying something. So the first takeaway message was emotions are important. We should take them into account in our architecture. The second takeaway message at the end of this part I would like to share with you is that not only textual information is important, but also, visual information, so images, is also important. So we carry out some some experiments on the 3 data sets. I will go a little bit faster. Of course, if you're interested in this stuff, I can share the slides, no problem, or you can contact me, or you can find more information in the papers you can see at the bottom of the slides. But I will go a little bit faster. So the main idea, I would like to share with you the main idea. So basically, given a document that contains also images, what we did was, from one hand, processing the textual information and representing this textual information with the word embedding, like Word2Vec, for instance, maybe also taking into account the sentiment, the overall sentiment of this textual part. And on the other hand, apart from some visual patterns like local binary pattern and so on, but I mean, okay, important, but what could be maybe more interesting is to focus on what we did, employing 5 pre-trained deep learning models like VGG16, VGG19, ResNet, Inception, Exception, that were models trained on ImageNet, a very big data set of images with associated a tag. So basically, this model, given an image, we're able to infer a possible tag that could somehow explain the content of the image. And we decided to consider the top 10 tags of the ranking that each of these pre-trained models could return. So basically, for each of them, what we did was to find the similarity with respect to the content of the textual information. So with respect to the Word2Vec, the word embedding. This was done with calculating this similarity via the cosine measure. And so at the end of the story, we had all these features that we passed to a classifier. In our case, was a multi-layer perceptron, and that had to decide that the document in the sense of textual and visual components, refer to fake news or to real information. What we can appreciate, of course, that is not always the same on each of the 3 data sets we use to carry out our experiments, but what we can see that at least the best results weren't obtained only with text, so the word embeddings, or only with, who knows, text and some visual features, but were obtained by textual information. So the similarity, the cosine similarity between the word embeddings and these tags inferred by the pre-trained deep learning models from the images. And in one case, actually, in a couple of cases, on a couple of data sets, also the tags themselves, so the captions, and also the LBP feature. So anyway, the takeaway message is that it's important to consider also the visual information. In a follow-up work, I will just mention briefly, we said, what about if actually the document contains more than one image? Why not considering also the others, or maybe not all, but at least some of them? And this is what we did. In this case, we just use one of the 3 data sets, and we use BERT, the bidirectional encoder representation from the transformers by Google in order to process the textual information. But the idea was basically the same, to calculate the similarity later with the captions, the tags inferred. In this case, not by 5, we use just 1. We use just VGG16 as a pre-trained deep learning model. And so what we did was we simplified the process a little bit. We focus on the title, because the title usually, and sometimes also is true, the beginning of a document, but especially the title is used to grab our attention, right? And so potentially is in the title where we could already detect some false information. The textual information of the title was processed by the BERT-based transformer. And then we consider more than 1 images. Here you have 3, because actually we carry out experiments with 2, with 4, and when it's possible. It's the best results were obtained with 3 images. And so the tags were inferred by, as I say, the VGG16 pre-trained model. Then we pass this information to LSTM. And also in this case, we calculated the cosine similarity between the tokens of the title, so the words that are in the title, and the tags of each of the 3 images. We can concatenate all the features, and then we pass this information once more to a multi-layer perceptron. And what we can appreciate is that, as I already said, the best score was obtained with 3 images, when it was possible, of course. Not only the textual information, not only LSTM, but also, not only the visual information of the image that was LSTM was fed with, but also the textual information, the similarity, the cosine similarity between the words of the titles and the tags. Of course, we wanted to compare ourselves with the state of the art, so other 2 systems that, as you can see, had a similar approach. So they use word embeddings, they use, in this case, a CNN, so convolutional neural networks, and not LSTM, and they use a VGG19 instead of 16, but at the end of the story, the idea was the same, and also spot fake that rely on BERT for the textual information and VGG19 for the visual information. Anyway, our approach was slightly better, but here is not the case to sell we were the best. But the takeaway message is that is important, and not only take into account emotional signals, as what I told you before, but also visual information, also the information that is contained in images, because sometimes there is, sometimes some aspects are highlighted in images that could correspond to the textual information, but only partially. So taking into account also them is important. And now the third part I would like to share with you with respect to this information. Okay, sometimes we use this fashionable terms of fake news, but we shouldn't. We should talk about this information, because the fake news is not a fake from first line to the last one. Actually, fake news contain partially some truthful information, but anyway, this is the fashionable term. So sometimes it's easier also to publish with the fake news in the title. Anyway, what I wanted to say is that what is important from the point of view of who is going to write this false information, this fake news, for their propagation is composed. So the cycle is what? Of course, it's important to know, in order to stop this propagation, something about the person who could have started spreading this information, or actually at least something about the information we are receiving the user, sorry, we are receiving this information from, because maybe in the past he or she share already some false information. So it's kind of important to profile the users from this perspective. And then, well, it's a factor that why, I mean, the information, also the false information propagates, because of the confirmation bias. So sometimes we could make the error of not checking the veracity of the information we receive if somehow this information is in line with what we believe. So what is called a confirmation bias. And also because of the echo chambers. So we relate ourselves in a community, maybe in social media, where I mean, also the other members basically share, I mean, our beliefs. So we are. The risk is just because of that, and not double checking the information a member of the community we, in between quotes, belong to is sending. So apart from that, so it's key to know something more about who is, I mean, sharing this information or propagating this information. Not necessarily because I mean, the person really wants to share, to propagate this false information, but just maybe because of the confirmation bias, as I said, or just because of a side effect of echo chambers, the person doesn't double check the veracity of the information and simply shares the message. So if this happened already in the past, it's important to know it. So it's important somehow to know the credibility of the users, of the source of this information. So we try to approach this problem once more with a deep learning technique, in this case using convolutional neural networks, but once more we didn't want just to rely on the textual information, so via word embeddings, but we wanted to see if some linguistic patterns, and also the personality, the information about the user could help somehow in discriminate if the user is more keen to be a fake news spreaders or a fact checkers. So someone that actually double check things before sharing this information. So we didn't want to rely in a bland way on the textual information via the word embeddings, but we wanted to integrate in our deep learning architecture. And this, I think, is important from a linguistic, computational linguistic perspective, to understand that, for instance, in our case, the integration of a psycholinguistic component, or in the previous case, the integration of emotional signals could make the difference. So we still, as a computational linguist, have a role there, not simply in a bland way to apply these deep learning techniques, that, as you know, in many cases, they are criticized for no matter obtaining, in many cases, the best results, but for being a kind of a black boxes. So at the time of the decision making, not providing those explanations that are important from an interpretability, explainability perspective. What is called XAI, so explainable artificial intelligence. So we still have a role, and this is what we wanted to show. So as a linguistic patterns of this psycholinguistic component, we use the category of the 73 psychological meaningful linguistic categories of Luke, a resource linguistic inquiry word count developed by Pennebaker, that I guess many of you are aware of. So, I mean, the words that belong to this category, pronouns, actually pronouns play an important role in personality, for instance, also in the gender identification and so on. So it's important to take them into account, the personal concerns, the tense of verbs, words related to the cognitive processes, informal language, affective processing, and so on, and also personality information. So how to calculate the personality scores. In this case, we refer to the Big Five, or sometimes it's called, the taxonomy is called Ocean, because of the first letter of the 5 traits: openness to experience, conscientiousness, extraversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. So we rely on previous work by Naumann colleagues, where they come up with a list of adjectives for each of these 5 traits. And so basically we could somehow calculate the score, comparing, analyzing the textual information, the word embeddings of the user. Remember that here we are working at the user level. So we are analyzing, I mean, a chunk of messages of the user. And in case of having a higher similarity, so containing more adjectives of one of these traits, okay, certain score was assigned to that personality trait. So in order to make things short, the story shorter, what we can appreciate here, okay, well, results in terms of F scores are not very high. This shows that the problem is not trivial, but at least what we can appreciate is that the best results were obtained not only with the CNN architecture, better than LSTM in this case, but with all these psycholinguistics and personality features I mentioned. So just with the personality wasn't enough to obtain the best result. Just with the Luke category wasn't enough. With both of them, okay, it was possible to obtain the best results. Not very high, but still the best ones among the others. So the classical machine learning techniques with sorry, that take into account took into account sentiment information, emotions, and so on, or Luke itself, personality. Okay, wasn't enough with the best results, as I say, they were obtained with CNN enriched architecture with this component. We we actually organize every year. We have been organizing since 2013 in a lab, PAN, lab of the CLE Universe conference. We organized a shared task last year on profiling fake news spreaders, and okay, data set was provided in English and in Spanish, maybe not too big, because just 200 authors contain, so 300 for training and 200 for test for English, and the same for Spanish, balance, so 200 and 200, and each author feed was composed by 100 tweets. So maybe not enough text in order to allow the deep learning techniques to generalize to obtain the best results. And that's why the best results actually were obtained among the 66 teams. Actually, many of them employ deep learning techniques or transformers, but the best results were obtained by an ensemble of a logistic regression or a super vector machine with the textual information represented with n-grams of words, of characters, including also stylistic features. So what I said so far is not always the case, that the deep learnings actually help obtaining the best results. Well, it is quite likely, but only if the data set is big enough. And to say something more, even if briefly, I would like to say something about not the importance, not only of profiling fake news spreaders, but also conspiracy propagators. So we carry out a preliminary experiments. So we took into account, comments about the Earth is flat, where is Brazil here? And so on and so forth. So on the basis of certain hashtags that have been used quite often by the pro-conspiracy, so anti-vax, flat Earth, that we never landed on the moon, so moon landing fake, and so on and so forth. And some others hashtags that instead had been used more by anti-conspiracy. So we came up with a certain big, but probably not big enough, who knows, approximately 1,000 user, 1,000 pro-conspiracy user, 1,000 anti-conspiracy, approximately, slightly less. And of course, for each of them, a certain number of tweets, 100 approximately each. What we could appreciate analyzing the data set, that propagators have less followers, have 9 times less followers because they have young accounts. And non-propagators user, talking about personality, have a higher score in agreeableness, conscientiousness, and extroversion. Instead, the propagators had a pretty high score in introversion. So basically, we're pretty introverted and not so agreeable on average. They talk, the propagators, they talk a lot more about the religions than the anti-propagators, let's say. Actually, if you remember what happened, the march towards the Capitol and the QAnon conspiracy theory and so on. So anyway, many of them believe that Donald Trump was there sent by God to save them, by Biden and so on. So religion anyway was present a lot. And when they are not propagators tend to use more swear words and the hate speech. So somehow related to the other side of the harmful information, the other side of the coin, of this coin, the use of hate speech. We approach this problem also with deep learning architecture, but once more, we didn't want just to rely on text, so we wanted to take into account the personality traits and sentiments, emotions that in this case weren't very helpful, but yes, personality traits and psycholinguistics information in general. Even if we don't have time to analyze the results in detail, the takeaway message is that once more, just relying on textual information and the deep learning architecture is not enough. Also, psycholinguistic information, personality information could actually help in obtaining slightly higher results. Right. So basically, these are the three takeaway messages. What I just said, also in terms of emotional sickness and also in terms of multimodality. So also visual information should be taken into account. Now, if I have 10 minutes more or so, I would like to say something about the other side of the coin, of the harmful information coin, let's say. So hate speech. But briefly, I won't enter into details with results, so we don't have the time. But at least I would like to share with you the attempts that we made in terms of the organization of shared tasks about hate speech, whose target were women and immigrants, and misogyny detection, and also, as I said at the very beginning, the importance to detect implicit cases of hate speech. So stereotypes, for instance, about immigrants or women. Many related concepts are used, and in this recent work, colleagues some Italian colleagues tried to basically relate this similar, but not so similar sometimes concepts. So the most generic concept is abusive, toxic language. Then, a language concretely could contain hate speech. Not always aggressive, could be aggressive, but sometimes, as I said before, it could be implicit, maybe making use of stereotypes to convey the hateful, message. And not necessarily offensive, so using bad words and so on. And of course, there is some overlapping with problems like misogyny, when the target of a potential hate speech are women, racism, homophobia, etc. It's important, first of all, in order to realize that we have a problem, to monitor what's going on. This is a project carried out by these Italian colleagues of the University of Turin. And actually at the region level in Italy, they wanted to see, in different times, different days of the months, if the situation changed in terms of number of tweets containing a speech. And so they represented visually this information. So if a region was more red, meant that more tweets sent by this geolocation, the geolocations of the regions contain hate speech. So it was a matter then to understand why, what happened. So because maybe something happened with respect to immigrants that they wanted to reach by boats the south of Italy, or something happened with respect to some religious minority or a gypsy, and so on and so forth. We organize a shared task at Semeval in English and Spanish in Twitter, focusing on hate speech against immigrants and women. And so the first aim was, first of all, to detect speech, and then to see actually if it was the case of an aggressive tweet, so tweet containing aggressive language. And we also wanted to know if the hate speech message was towards an individual or the collective, so all the immigrants, all the women, and so on. So without looking at the results and approaches, I can tell you, yes, a majority of approaches that you can imagine were deep learning based. And once more, even if among the best performing teams, we had the deep learning approaches, the very best, once more, maybe the data set should have been bigger, weren't, deep learning based, the deep learning based one. But what could be somehow interesting to see that both in English and Spanish, well, first of all, of course, this is not a realistic scenario. Actually, this was one of the criticisms. So it's true that hate speech on Twitter and social media is a problem, but it's also true that we are not, it's not the case of having a pretty balanced cases of hateful comments or non-hateful comments. So hate speech, tweets containing hate speech are less than 10%, but yeah, well, we organize it this way, putting ourselves in the shoes of a machine learning approach. So in order to give enough examples of with hateful content. But what instead represents the real, a more real scenario is to see that in the case of immigrants, these hateful comments refer in the majority of the case, both in English and Spanish, to the collective. So all the immigrants, you know, come to steal our jobs, you know, this kind of messages you can come across. But what we'll see is not the case for women. And the majority of hateful tweets were contain aggressive language, as you can see, both in English and Spanish, but pretty good number also non-aggressive languages. So this is the case, as I said, of implicit hate speech messages, maybe conveying hate speech via the use of stereotypes, for instance, with respect to immigrants. With respect to women, it's pretty different, as you can see. The target is you know, the generic target. So all women is not so big. Actually, majority of hateful comments address an individual, a specific person, a specific woman, both in English and Spanish. And something different. We should investigate these aspects more. In the case of Spanish, majority of the hateful comments contain aggressive language. In the case of English, was the opposite. So more implicit, more stereotypes were used. And actually, this year at the PAN Lab, we have organized, and we just finished analyzing the results, a profiling exercise, profiling a task on hate speech spreaders, and where the target of hate was mainly immigrants and women. Once more, and we had once more 66 teams participating. Why women and immigrants? Well, this is a study that referred to the situation in Italy. Originally, I'm from Italy myself, so I collaborate a lot with some Italian colleagues there. And in the case of hate speech, a majority of hateful comments are on Twitter towards women and also immigrants. But of course, other collective should be, other groups should be taken into account, like LGBT, for instance. If I can, 5 minutes more, I would like to share, and if you are interested in the topic, of course, you can investigate it more in the overview papers, or you can contact me. Of course, we weren't interested in just addressing the hate speech problem when the target were women, but we wanted also to study the misogyny identification problem. Not only to be able to identify misogynous and non-misogynous content, but also to understand something more, what kind of misbehavior was we came across. So 5 categories were considered: derailing, so just excusing what happened, wearing a tiny skirt, just asking for it; dominance, the macho man approach to the problem, let's say; discredit, just to say something with no sense; stereotype and objectification, women to the kitchen, and unfortunately there are people men saying things like this. And the one that quite likely is the more serious one because it contains sexual harassment and threat of violence. We carry out this task in 3 occasions, and we came up with an English data set, an Italian data set, and Spanish data set. Okay. Without, as I said, looking at the results, what I wanted to highlight that, as you can see, in the 3 languages, English, Italian, and Spanish, it's not always possible to distinguish clearly these 5 categories, right? And so, I mean, there are some categories that they have some overlap with the others. So it's important to explain, as I said, what's going on at the time of decision making, at the time of classifying in one of these categories, the hateful content, the misogynist content in this case. And so this is because in one, so we oversimplify the problem. So in one sentence, just more than one category could be represented somehow. Like in this case, you stupid, so discredit, go back to the kitchen. This is the stereotype, okay? So we should try to organize this shared task or to address this problem, I mean, at the finer level, or allowing a multi-label classification of this misogynous text. And moreover, I would like to finish saying that this is a gender, so everything depends on the eyes we look at the problems, because we ask women and men, of course, at the time of annotating the data, if they given what was I mean, tagged as a misogynist, if they consider aggressive or not aggressive, and of course, a majority of women consider majority of cases as aggressive, but instead just half of men consider, I mean, these cases as aggressive. So what is important here also is to address the problem from a multimodal perspective, because these misogynist contents are spread, are conveyed via memes, for instance. And what is important also to come up with a counter narrative, in the sense that with respect to hate speech versus women or versus immigrants and other groups, because at the end of the story, it's important to monitor what's going on in social media. It's important to try to detect these cases and possibly also to warn these people and not to use this vocabulary in social media. Okay, this is always at the border between free speech and or not, but what is important is to educate people with respect to stereotypes and prejudices. So with respect to multimodal hate speech, not a lot has been done. This is one of the few works. And actually, I mean, this is a case that is it's clear. I mean, if you come across to a text like "it's so hard being a nigger," you could think, okay, maybe it's actually a statement written by, I mean, black person. I mean, it's tough to be a nigger, I don't know, in US or whatever. Or if you look at the picture, could be cute. I mean, little monkey there, but they all together, I mean, it's pretty, I mean, hate speech, hateful, it's a hateful content, the two together. So this is just an example that is important, that should highlight the importance of addressing the problem from a multimodal perspective. And this is one of the few data sets that are available in the case you want to carry out some experiments. And the last, as I said, it's important also to try to detect not the explicit cases of hate speech, but also the implicit one, the most difficult to be detected also, not only from an automatic perspective, but also, I mean, for us, when stereotypes are used to convey basically some hateful content. And this is what we try to do, focusing on immigrants and focusing on Spanish. So we try to, first of all, to come up with a taxonomy in order to see, to categorize the attitude as positive, negative, or ambivalent. If the immigrants were seen as a threat, as resources from economical perspective of victims. So it was, it's very important to frame the situation, because depending on that, it's a little bit easier to understand the way that the stereotype is used. Just a few words about some projects, international projects going on. This one in Italy by these Italian colleagues funded by Google. So it's important to come up with a countering a narrative with respect to hate speech. So actually, in these days, there is a lot of debate in Spain, in this case, because a young person was killed just because was gay, and so this is no sense to die because of that. And two immigrants from Senegal tried to help him, but they didn't succeed. They were in minority. And this is just one of these cases where, you know, people generalize about immigrants. I mean, just to come up with a counter narrative in order to make people reflect on some hateful content written by someone else. And there are works from computational linguistic perspective that have been done in the recent years in order to come up with some countering narrative with respect to certain communities, like Jewish, in this case, Blacks, LGBT. And there are different techniques to come up with a counter narrative using presenting facts, as the one I was mentioning before, just pointing out the hypocrisy, a contradiction of the hater, you know, also trying to be ironic, using some humor, or in some cases, unfortunately, also with hostility, trying to fight this trend. Anyway, there isn't the magic technique, but what is important is at least to try to address this problem also from a computational linguistics perspective, and especially, I mean, youngers. Youngers are the target, our futures. So there are projects at the European level where actually the aim is to prevent a to come up with a counter narrative, produce alternative narratives to a speech, as I said before. So this is basically the most important thing, no matter the computational linguistics approaches, and no matter the results we could obtain when we address this problem automatically. So this is the end of my talk. Sorry, I realized that maybe I talk a little bit longer. Obrigado, and I'm very happy to answer any question, inquiry you could have. Otherwise, of course, you can contact me anytime by mail. I will try to answer your doubts. Obrigado.
Again, thanks so much, Professor Paulo Rosso, for your excellent presentation. Well, in my doctoral studies, I research about satire news description linguistics, for example, lexical or syntactic patterns yet. And in my master's degree, I worked with linguistic skills of irony in opinion texts, more specifically in news comments in Brazilian Portuguese.
Interesting.
So your presentation are very important to my work. So satirical news is considered to be entertainment and it's potentially deceptive and harmful.
No, but it's more misinformation, but potentially you're right. It could be so harmful.
Because a person may not understand satire or irony in the text. Yeah. Several approaches consider satirical news as kind of fake news because of this. Do you believe it's possible to differentiate satirical content, for example, from falsehood? And would it be possible for the machine to understand this difference with good accuracy?
Yeah, I mean, I can see with some colleagues of mine. I mean, I've been working on irony detection with a few of my PhD students, and actually, it's a topic I like also because I'm an ironic person, and because sometimes it's the only way to to tell someone without being too what you think without being too rude. So I like irony, and I know that it's difficult to be detected because I can see it. But no matter that, talking about satire, I don't have the results here category by category, but if I don't remember wrongly, with respect to these experiments we carry out on with also satirical news or tweets containing satirical information. I mean, in majority of the cases, it was possible to distinguish satirical information from truthful information. But to be honest, I don't remember the exact numbers. I mean, okay, it was just 1 year ago, but wow, I don't remember. So to a certain extent, is possible. I mean, of course, it's not trivial, but.
For example, in Brazil, the political scenario seems as absurd as satirical news. Like the turtle example, your example. It sounds like a lie, but isn't, and makes our work even more difficult.
Yeah. Yeah, I understand. Not only in Brazil, it's worldwide.
Yeah. In this context, I see computer science filters some satirical news detection system based on neural nets. Despite the good results, from a linguistic viewpoint, this task may not describe how satire actually takes place in a document. It's not easy to recognize the satire if the satirical cues are too subtle to be unmasked and the read lacks the contextual or cultural background.
Yeah, you're right. I should have distinguished because here, of course, we address satire in the framework of satirical news, satirical information, and so on. So in this case, let's say that you can always to do fact checking. And so if the information that is, I mean, is contained in a satirical text doesn't really match from a fact-checking perspective what you can find in some fact-checking sites, then maybe is slightly more less difficult than in a more general scenario. Here it was the case, in many cases, referred to political news. So there are a few, political sites where you can double check the veracity in terms of factual information, at least of the information. So from this perspective, maybe that we didn't find it so difficult to detect also the satirical cases in these data sets. And but yes, you're right. Otherwise, it's not trivial at all. Yeah.
Thank you for your answers. Now I will ask some questions for the answer. The first question is from Claudio Padua. He asks Professor Rosso, I would like to thank you for this wonderful talk, as well as to congratulate you for great work on this very important and concerning subject. This commentary.
Thank you. Obrigado.
Other questions to Bruno Guidi. Minutes. She asks, is there any relationship between the presence of hate speech and whether the post is an outrage post or response? I've been studying the topic and I think this predictive trait is very important.
I have to be honest, I'm not sure to have understood properly the question. Could you repeat, please?
I can repeat it.
No, say it again. I will put the volume a little bit higher.
Is there any relationship between the presence of hate speech and whether the post is an original post or response? I've been studying the topic and I think this predictive trait is very important.
Okay, so basically taking into account if it is a response to a previous message, right? Something like this, right? So if it is in the framework of kind of a dialogue with another person and so on, did I hear it properly? Yes, if this is the case, certainly it's very much important. Unfortunately, we didn't approach the problem at this level, not even in the shared task we organized. So we just, talking about the shared task we just organized at PAN on profiling haters. Yes, we didn't consider, we just gave for each potential hater 200 tweets, but without considering, without the extra information, if a tweet was a reply to another message, what message, and so on. And also in the other shared task we organized a couple of years ago, again, this was at the tweet level, but we didn't consider, if the tweet was a reply to some other message, and this contextual information would be no doubt important. Sometimes from a computational linguistic perspective, we have the necessity to be pragmatic, to simplify, and I would say that we can commit the error to oversimplify the problem. But this wants to be not just, of course, the solution, but just a first feasible attempt to address the problem. Then, once, I mean, a decent, at least the preliminary, there are some preliminary approaches that seem to work decently at least, then it's the case to address the problem in a more holistic way, taking into account, for sure, contextual information. But when I say contextual information, I mean if a potential hateful comment was the result of a reply to a previous comment, and so on and so forth. So definitely this is the way to proceed. These are, if you want, preliminary results, but then the interesting stuff also from a linguistic viewpoint would be to try to understand something more. Okay, we try also to do something in this direction, for instance, with respect to the first side of the harmful information coin, so fake news. When we integrated, you know, information about the personality of the user, information about other psycholinguistic features and so on. But a lot, so the takeaway message is a lot needs to be done, not only in English, I guess, also in Portuguese, or especially in Portuguese, because unfortunately, in many cases, we end up to work especially on English data, because we are asked to compare ourselves to previous work. But it's important to, I mean, to release, to come up with data in the other languages, Spanish, Portuguese, and so on. Actually, if I can comment something about this, in Spain, in the last year, we have been, the computational linguistic community, we have been organizing a workshop whose name is Iberlef, on where the aim is to organize a shared task in Spanish, in Portuguese, in Catalan, in Basque, and yes, anyway, the languages of the here, Spain and Portugal, but in the broad sense, in the sense Latin America. And this year we had a shared task organized on irony detection in Portuguese by some Brazilian colleagues. So I'm saying this because of the importance of providing to the local research communities with data sets in this case, in Brazilian Portuguese, in Mexican Spanish, in Spanish in general, and so on. And the way, I mean, organizing a shared task on a specific problem, could be a speech in Portuguese, it could be fake news in Portuguese, could be whatever you are interested in, is actually helpful. And because this allows PhD, Master in Science students to participate in a shared task on, in your case, Portuguese data, and then to compare themselves. So my suggestion is to you in general, I just see Gabriela, I cannot see the rest, and to think about this possibility for next year, and I can actually provide you some information about this year Iberlef workshop in order to let you know what could be done, organized for next year. This year we had 12 tasks, and over 12 tasks, 5 of them were organized by a researcher from the other side of the ocean. So not only from Brazil, but from Mexico, from other countries, from Uruguay, and so on. So it's yeah, it's important for our communities to provide data sets in languages different than just English. Sorry for the ads.
Sure. We don't have any questions. Bruno says, thanks for the answer. It was very insightful. I am struggling to find a good representation for the conversational chain.
Yeah, conversational chain is at the point for many tasks.
Well, no questions.
Probably majority fell asleep already. No? Well, it's early for you. So. Well, it's nearly time to lunch, right? Or you had the lunch already there? What time is it there? No, you didn't have lunch.
Yeah. I'm very grateful for Professor Rosso's participation this morning, and it was certainly an excellent discussion for the NLP and other areas of linguistics. I invite everyone to continue watching and promoting Abralina ao vivo, and thank you, Professor.
So I guess, well, obrigado to all of you. I guess you recorded this, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so no need to send the slides because they can see the slides already. Okay, no problem. Okay, obrigado.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.